Welcome everyone to the Cucina Aurora Kitchen Witchery podcast. Another episode of Conversational Witchcraft, which is pretty exciting because this is the first person we have had on twice. This is very exciting. She is our first repeat guest. It is the amazing Amy Blackthorn. I feel like I need to come up with I need like a clap track, and I need like a superhero theme song for the amazing Amy Blackthorn.
There should be some symbols involved.
Right, some symbols. In case you don't know, the fabulous Amy Blackthorn. She is a professional intuitive and author of Blackthorn's Botanical Magic, Sacred Smoke, and Blackthorn's Botanical Brews. Apparently, she loves alliteration as well. Is that the right word? Alliteration.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All the bees.
Right, all the bees. She has a certification in aromatherapy and incorporates her experiences in a traditional witchcraft with her horticulture studies. Amy's company, Blackthorn's Botanicals, creates tea based on magical herbal formulas. She has appeared in print as well as on Coast to Coast AM, HuffPoLive, Netflix Top 10 Secrets and Mysteries, and an episode of Supernatural Abilities. Amy lives in Delaware, and you can visit Amy's tea shop at blackthornbotanicals.com. Amy Blackthorn, Amy Blackthorn, right? You are so awesome. And yeah, you really are my first repeat guest.
That's so awesome.
That is kind of awesome. I was like, oh my goodness, you're the first person I've had twice because you're double the pleasure, double the fun. I don't.
Totally a thing.
Is it totally a thing? Is it totally a thing? I'm just so like, okay, so I had you on, geez, I don't know, a year ago. So first of all, how the fuck are we still in a pandemic? Second of all, how has it been a year since I talked to you? Third of all, how have I been doing a podcast for a year? I don't know. I don't know. What have you been doing besides writing another amazing book, which we'll talk about later?
In 2021, I wrote 2 encyclopedias and started a novel. So it's like my brain is just leaking out into the computer.
But don't you feel like that's kind of what has happened? Like a lot of distractions have been taken away.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that go, the treadmill. I felt like the treadmill that I was on before COVID, getting off that treadmill after the shock and the survival mode. And then you get into that equilibrium of, oh, this is life now. Creativity and all the things that maybe you hadn't been working on are all of a sudden flooding out of you.
Yes. My analogy was one of the elliptical, that's the word. Because I'm 8 feet tall, even the ones that are giant, I feel like I'm tippy-toeing on, and then I get too fast and then I will fall down and smack my face. It's not great. So we don't use that thing, but I know what you mean.
Right? Like all of a sudden, all these things are just spilling out of you. What encyclopedias are you talking about? We're going to have another interview to talk about those.
So we have the Protection Magic book that came out 2 weeks ago. Time has no meaning. And then for Samhain, I have Blackthorn's Botanical Wellness coming out. Yes.
That's kind of amazing. We are recording this in April, but this episode isn't going to air until probably the late summer because we have so many people that have booked, and we kind of do our recording all at once and then schedule things out just because my schedule is crazy. So right now in April, Blackthorn's Protection Magic, which I was lucky enough to get a copy of like way ahead of time, which makes me feel like a celebrity. I'm not gonna lie. And it's freaking great. So this just came out at the time of recording of this. By the time this airs, everyone's going to have a copy of this because it's amazing. And then you're going to have something else out. So we're just going to have to just keep having you back on because you are a writing in a magical machine. Right. I mean,
it's a heavy burden, but I am willing to soldier forward.
So when you were here last time, we were talking about your Botanical Brews book, which is so great because it's all like mixology and drinks and teas and alcoholic beverages, which is super fun. and it's just a great book. And I loved it so much because of its element of kitchen witchery and the alchemy of what we do in the kitchen with different ingredients to glean our spiritual goals and all of that. And at that time we were talking about your basically your mundane life in security and martial arts and all of those things. But for people who might not have heard your first interview, if you haven't, go back in the archives of this podcast and listen to it. Let's talk about that background and just give us everybody a brief synopsis of what you do for a living outside of being a professional witchcraft.
I'm honestly so privileged and lucky to be able to be a witch and have a life that revolves around my magic, because I spent so many years, 15 years in executive protection and private security, and I couldn't be my whole self because it's such a conservative field that my very first large contract was the personal bodyguard for the CFO of a $30 million company. And that was like, it just killed my soul in a lot of pieces. It not only is it hard, but when you, my client in question was both locally famous and then everyone knew he was a witch. So that had its own separate set of problems, because there's the people who don't like you because you have money. There's people who don't like you because you aren't a member of their religious sect. And there is the ego of the person in question who's like, oh, well, I do this and I do this and I'm famous. I want people to know that. Well, that makes my job a lot harder. If you're running to people and say, do you know who I am? Like, don't do that. We need some communication here.
That's a bad look. It's a bad look for any, like, if Oprah can't go into a store and say, do you know who I am? She would never do that. She would never. Do you remember that story that came out about her like a couple of years ago? She went into a fancy ass shop and the service, it was like a Pretty Woman moment, and the service people wouldn't help her. And she was not, she's just a person, right? So she doesn't come with her entourage and her full makeup on. Maybe she doesn't look like Oprah. And she just left. She didn't say, do you know who I am? If Oprah can't say that, nobody can say that. That's just not a good look. And yeah, as a security person, your job is to keep that person safe. And if that person is acting out in a way that is not, I don't want to say inconspicuous, but is like stirring the pot.
Right.
How difficult was that for you? My goodness.
Well, that's the thing. He wanted everyone to know who he was and what he did and all this. But if somebody came up to him at dinner, it's like, okay, your family would like to spend time with you at this point. So getting upset and causing a scene when someone like wants to take a selfie with you isn't helpful on any level. Like your family's mad at you. These poor people who just want to say hi are now have their feelings hurt, and
it's a bad look.
Get to put a lot of fires out.
Yeah. So that's your job background is personal security, which is, I think we discussed this last time, I find very intriguing, right? Because I love anything having to do with like Secret Service and spies and stuff like that, right? So like in my mind, I'm like, oh, she's got an earpiece in and she's like radioing to headquarters to check the perimeter, and like, is that reality or is that bullshit?
A little bit of both. So I could. This gentleman's wife was really fantastic, but very, very shy. Not just like camera shy, but had a personal history of anxiety revolving around people looking. Like, it was very difficult. And so it's like, okay, these are the things that we can do. I'm here. So I would have to like put on a fancy gown and go to charity events with him looking like a person, not secret agent Amy. So
I love that so much. I know it's I mean, it's not right. Like, I'm always joking around with my partner and I'm like, I would be the best spy ever. And he's like, no, you wouldn't. I'm like, no, I would be, because no one would suspect me because I'm a giant goofball. But all the time I'd be watching and observing, That's also the diligence of having to be in security, the mindset of someone like yourself who has been trained throughout your life to be observant, not only of other people, but of the world and the situations around you. Is that something that is paramount in your own personal practice of witchcraft?
Absolutely. When we look at, there's vigilance and understanding of your surroundings. There's that situational awareness that everyone should have. Not everyone understands that at this point in their life. They may get there. And then there's the external pieces where you recognize the number of threats escalating, and it can get you can slip over the line from situational aware to hypervigilant very easily, because there's such a wide variety of options that could be happening. The biggest part, when you're understanding, okay, we've now slipped over into hypervigilance, that can bleed over into your magic and your witchcraft by constantly checking your protection wards, or constantly renewing your spells around the house, or putting in new crystal grids to make sure that nothing can get in. Like, it can very easily slip in. That hypervigilance can carry over very easily. So having magical friends who you can check in with and say, hey, this is where I'm feeling. Is there possibly, am I overthinking this? Well, I've ADHD. It's overthinking is what I do. Most people's overthinking is just regular thinking for us.
Well, that's a really good point. And through the lens of protection magic, right? And I guess, like, I tend to be an overthinker because I was not a great learner. I wasn't a great student when I was a kid and through high school. And so I always feel like maybe I'm missing something. So I check and I recheck and I double check and I make sure that I've done everything right. And I go back over things over and over again. In my own personal life, in my own personal work, you can get in your head about things, and that influences, if I'm understanding you correctly, can influence the magical working that we're doing, tainting it almost with a paranoia if you go too far.
Absolutely, 1,000%. There are people who are because what control looks like for someone with anxiety, we're trying to prevent whatever bad thing from happening. So we're like, okay, if I examine it from every angle, then I can keep the bad thing from happening. The problem with that is, it's not just that it doesn't work, because we can't just hold our breath and make nothing bad ever happen. But it gets to the point where you, as a magical practitioner, are now jumping at shadows, magically speaking,
and literally speaking.
And you are absolutely right. The discernment that we need as magical practitioners can get buried under that film of anxiety, trying to prevent whatever bad thing from happening. But when we spend so much time checking and rechecking to make sure nothing bad happens, if something bad happens, we then blame ourselves. Like, I didn't think of this one thing that had like a millionth of a percentage point chance of ever happening, so therefore I must have deserved whatever happened. That is not a thing. We do not blame the victim. It is not your fault. It is the person who committed that crime or that action. It's their fault. And I say this with all of my heart, this idea that we can magically protect ourselves from ever having anything bad lends itself very easily to victim blaming. Oh, well, you didn't do enough magic. You didn't do enough warding. That's not a thing. We don't do that here.
Right. 100% right. Whether it is in magic or is in our mundane lives, victim blaming is really never okay. I mean, it's never okay. I like to go back to what you said about the anxiety. As someone who suffers with anxiety, that is very poignant for me in my practice. And so I'd like to talk about that. I think that's something we don't talk about just in general in the witchcraft community. And I recently have started conversations and been interviewing people that feel very similarly to me about these topics in terms of mental health, right? And emotional health. And you talk in the book quite broadly about protection of physical, spiritual, emotional, right? All
Right.
of these things need to be working. There's not just one. You can't just be a really great martial artist and think that's going to protect your emotional well-being. Likewise, you can't just lay out a crystal grid and think all of your mental and emotional problems are going to go away. That's just not reality. You have to have the balance of all of these things. So I was wondering, from your point of view as a magical practitioner, again, through the lens of the protectional magic, what did you find harder to write about and to discuss in this book? The physical, the emotional, or the spiritual protective magics?
Definitely the physical. So when
I'm so surprised at that. Tell me why.
So when I first came up with the idea for this book, you send in the proposal and it goes to the pub board and all that rigmarole that we go through every time we want to talk about a book. And my amazing editor, Judica, she presented it to the board, and she slipped in something that I hadn't put in my proposal, was my background in security in martial arts and executive protection and on and on and on. She's like, this is her actual life. Because it's such a conservative field, I've always had to keep Amy Blackthorn and security Amy separate. Like, never the twain shall meet. Like, I had separate friend groups and I had separate everything. Like, these two things do not mix. So when those lines started to bleed a little after I left security, and it got really itchy really quick.
Ooh.
Yes. So in the back of chapter 6, there's an explanation of an event that comes with a content warning. So I'm not going to talk about it. You can read it. But the idea of writing this book as someone who experienced something wholly traumatic and frankly dangerous, I had this bit of imposter syndrome sitting down to write it. Like, what right do I have to talk about protection magic if I had this awful thing happen? And I sat on my hands for probably a month before I called my editor and I was like, I am kind of stuck. Like, I can't even write a word here. This is how I'm feeling. And Judica said, darling, we want you to write this book because you have had these experiences, because you know how to deal with these experiences, and because you survived these experiences.
Right.
To be able to say, this is what I've gone through, this is what I've overcome, whatever. That's not something that just anybody can write about.
And it's important. It's important that someone who is a survivor, who has been victimized, but does not have a victim mentality, because those are very different things. You can be a victim of something awful, traumatic, horrific, and not have a victim mentality, right? That person is the person who needs to come forward, who needs to talk about those things to make the rest of us go, #me too, for lack of a better analogy.
Right.
These are important things. That's how we support each other. And I want to thank you for putting a personal experience in the book, being vulnerable, letting people understand these things happen and they are survivable.
And they happen. This person knew I was a concealed carry instructor. This person knew I was a competition shooter. This person knew I had a black belt. So my first instinct is to go, well, if I'm doing all the things that they tell people to do to prevent this crap from happening, like, what does someone who doesn't have this training and doesn't have these skills, what are their odds of successfully dealing with this? So the number of protection magic books that are out there, there's quite a few of them, but none of them talk about stuff that happens in the real world. Like, who should buy the right locks for your house? Okay, Kwikset is 75% of the new homes built in this country use Kwikset locks, so everybody knows how to pick them. So they're not as secure as you think they are. So I'm like, oh, go buy Slage because they have tighter. Yeah.
Mind fucking blown. Right? Like, mind fucking blown. Nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks about that in life, and nobody thinks about that in magic.
Right.
That everything you do is magic, right? If you're doing protection magic on your home, you can put as much salt as you want in front of your door. But if you have a shitty old lock, guess what? Right? Because we're always so in the spiritual realm and we don't think about the physical body. But if this physical body is hurt, then the spiritual shit doesn't matter because you're not going to be well enough to do the spiritual stuff.
Right.
That's what I mean. You have to balance all of these things. I like to look at wellness overall as a table, right? Right. Wellness overall as a table, each leg, 4 legs being spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, physical wellness, mental wellness. If one of those legs is short, the whole table wobbles. Right. And that plays right into how do we protect? I think protection often feels like a word that is, what am I looking for? Reactive as opposed to proactive.
Absolutely.
Right. But that's not the case. You are being proactive by buying better locks for your fucking doors.
Yes.
Right? Because bad things are still going to happen. How do you express to people who might ask you, like you said, you're a victim of something. Well, I did everything right. And then you're blaming yourself. You are victim shaming yourself, which I think especially women, oh, I should have checked my drink. Oh, I should have made sure that I wasn't wearing this. Oh, maybe I gave the wrong signals. Oh, and that's not just about assault. Okay. That's down to like how we treat each other in work environments. Oh, if I stood up for myself or this thing or that thing that may have happened. How do you talk to somebody about that from this perspective of protection magic?
The epigraph for Blackthorn's protection magic is usually the thing that I point them towards. Most people are good and occasionally do something they know is bad. Some people are bad and struggle every day to keep it under control. Others are corrupt to the core and they don't give a damn as long as they don't get caught. Evil is a completely different creature. Evil is bad that believes it's good. So arming ourselves against true evil doesn't have the look that we think that it should, because the people who are like, oh, I'm kind of a jerk on the weekends, whatever it is. Those are not the people we need to be most vigilant against. It's the people who think that they're right. And as witches, we deal with that way more than we should have to, because of the people who believe that our religion makes us evil. And those people who want to be on the right side of whatever option they're having, there's always going to be that idea that I don't worry about the person who wants to kill me because they hate me. I worry about the person who wants to kill me because they love me.
Right, because they want to save you.
Yes.
Right. And that, like you said, that unequivocal, I'm right and you're wrong. I joke around and I say, normal people think they're crazy. Crazy people think they're normal. Right. I mean, most of us walk through the world going, am I doing this right? I'm not sure. Crazy people are like, I'm 100% sure. I'm 100% sure that there are Jewish space lasers. That's what crazy people say. I feel like this book is so aptly timed. I think as human beings and as witches, and many of us being empaths, feel fear. We feel the fear of the potential victimization, as you said, those people that are targeting anyone that's different,
Yes.
whether you are a woman, whether you are of color, whether you are of a non-traditional gender identification. There's a lot of hate happening openly in the world right now, being amplified by all kinds of things. So I feel like this book, Protection Magic, is so aptly timed to help us take back some of our power and feel less afraid. What do you recommend for people who are feeling afraid?
If you have a copy, the first thing I tell these people to do is to go to chapter 6, because we have what to do if someone's following you home, what to do if you have a stalker, what to do if you're illegally detained. I don't use that other word. That is it's very difficult. So there's escape from zip ties, handcuffs, rope, duct tape, things that could potentially happen. It gives us enough understanding and tools for awareness without feeding the anxiety feedback loop that says, oh, if I can just plan all these things, you have options, you have some understanding. Here are some tools that we can give you. But a healthy amount of preparation is good. When we look at the things that have happened, I mean, I talk about this in sort of the beginning of the book, but as a person who has been a witch out of the broom closet for 20 years, I've been run off the road into oncoming traffic. I've had people show up at my house and threaten to kill my pets and burn down my house. I mean, the list goes on just because someone doesn't understand or like or agree with my religious preference.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's never okay. And as you said before, those are the people that are the most frightening because they believe 100% that they are right. I don't even know. I think we've all experienced something, especially in the witchcraft community. I think we've all experienced the fear of that ostracization. But not all of us have experienced a fear of physical harm. What about verbal harm? Can we talk about verbal harm?
Yes, yes, we should.
And cyber harm, especially for young people who are maybe just showing up to the witchcraft community, maybe just learning, maybe just starting out. Again, I think witchcraft community, pagan community, we're so open to so many different people that we're all others together, right?
Yes.
We're a whole bunch of weirdos, and it's just the best damn party in the world. We're a very accepting, loving group of people for the most part. And there's a place for everyone in that community, which is one of the things that drew me into the community. There is a lot of verbal harm out there. And I think the likelihood is some of us may have experienced physical harm. 99.99% of us have experienced verbal harm, hurtful words, bullying, whether it is from family, strangers, kids at school. We've all been fucking there, right? I mean, it's awful. And perhaps we participated in it as well, right?
There's always that possibility.
There's always that possibility that we weren't the greatest person, okay? Like, I am sure at some point in my life, I was a villain to someone. I'm sure there's somebody out there that is still like, that girl said something nasty to me once when I was 12. You know, and that's the reality of it. So how do we as witches, with your recommendations of this type of working, how do we deal with those things? And then how do we prevent those things?
One of my favorite ways is a tool that I found with my very first high priestess when I was 18 years old. And it is a small pack. It looks like an oversized matchbook. It's flash paper. Magicians use it to create that little spark of fire in their hand. Distracts you from whatever they're doing with this hand over here. But this brand is Fantastic Flash. You can get it just about joke shops, magic shops. If you get it online, it'll come wet. And then you have to open up this giant sheet of paper and let it air dry, because it is paper impregnated with saltpeter. So it goes up in a flash. There's a little flash of light, but there's no real heat. There's no ashes left over when it's done. It just completely ceases to be. So by taking a piece of this paper and writing the hurtful thing they said, or the name of this jerk person after you've contained, blocked, gotten control over their access, helps release some of that pent up energy that lives in your chest and makes you feel like you're going to scream. You can let it out with something that is destructive without being dangerous.
Wow. What a cool thing.
It's a really light tissue paper, so you can just tear it right out. It either comes in a large sheet or in these small matchbooks, but flash paper is one of the neatest magical tools that not enough people know about.
I didn't know about it. I mean, I've known about flash paper. I remember in like junior high, we used flash paper for a little special effect in drama club, but I would have never thought to use it in a magical way. What a fucking cool thing, Amy Blackthorn.
And it's combustible enough that you can light it with the tip of an incense. There's all sorts of ways that you can utilize it that add that sense of magical theater that gets our id involved. One of the reasons people say, oh, well, if you can do magic with no tools, then why use tools? Because there's a little 5-year-old that lives in every person on the planet that wants cake and gum and stickers and paints and fun. So if you're not involving them, that's why ritual theater is so important, because if you don't involve that inner 5-year-old, your magic isn't necessarily complete. It's lacking that spark that drives you in your heart. There's a difference between burning a stick of incense and creating a ritual around lighting that incense. There's two different pieces. There's, the mundane act of actually manipulating a lighter or matches, what have you. But the inner 5-year-old is what drives that magic outside of yourself and allows it to come to fruition. So if we're not engaging all the, our ego or super ego and the id all at the same time, where is your car going? You have no gas. Like, let's give it some gas to move forward. So doing things like this not only involve your higher self, but it gets that part of your brain that wants gum and stickers and candy involved alongside you. It's not just a thought experiment.
I love that. That's so cool, because it's often that inner 5-year-old that feels afraid. It's often that inner 5-year-old who doesn't know how to say, hey, please stop talking to me like that, to stand up. We have a lot of early childhood traumas, especially those of us with anxiety. Most of that has come through childhood and things that may have happened or physical abuses that may have happened when we were children. So that inner child, that inner 5-year-old who's like, I want to see something cool. I want to set something on fire. That feels good, because maybe that's the part that has been hurt. So to have that fear along for the ride, that little kid going, I'm afraid of this thing, or I was bullied, and so now I don't trust as an adult. Let me work through that with a tool like flash paper that engages that part of us. Wow, you just blew my mind wide open. Like that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, when did you start working with flash paper? Like how did you discover that? And I've never
17.
heard of anybody doing 13?
No, when I was 17.
17.
I grew up, or I was currently living in a very small rural Maryland county. And everyone gets this like, oh, idyllic small town. It's so bucolic. And they pat themselves on the back for giving money to the little people out in the country. But in that county, there was still a sundown town. They allowed a dude on Sunday mornings in broad daylight to hand out flyers for the 3-letter people. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is like a thing. I moved from Baltimore City. So I moved from a Black neighborhood to the middle of nowhere. And it's like, I had the privilege of being able to say, I thought that wasn't a thing anymore. Like my, blindness was like, I had no idea this was a thing.
No, racism is alive
So,
and well.
so great.
So great.
So when I was yanked out of the broom closet at 16, goodness, by a catty girl at school. So I needed to figure out how to deal with the not just bullying, but literal death threats from my peers at school who thought, oh, okay, this is what you do now. I mean, I had kids attempt to stone me getting off the bus, like with rocks. So understanding and being able to evaluate the things that are going on, it's a completely new world. So I'm like, okay, how do we not just move forward as a person, but how do we keep ourselves safe in a place that is really not safe to be other? Because that's not a choice I would have made. I would not have chosen for the entire school to know I was a witch.
Right, because that is keeping yourself safe, right?
Exactly.
And so often in our worlds, even today, especially today, saying I'm different is really putting yourself out there. You could be physically harmed or killed because of your religious choices, because of the color of your skin, because of who you love. It boggles my fucking mind that in the year 2022, this is still a conversation that we're having. Like when you're a kid and you're being taught about the horrors of the world, and I know I'm digressing, I apologize. When you're being taught about the horrors of the world and you're being taught about World War II and you're being taught about, enslavement in our country, you are led to believe these things are over.
Yeah, they always talk about it in the past tense. That one thing might have been in the past, but guess what, pumpkin? Like, this is where we are.
This is where we are. And we are constantly struggling against those things. We're still, fighting our way out of those awful, awful things as a society. I think I was just talking to someone else on the podcast. I just hit my microphone and my producer's going to be like, stop hitting the microphone. No, he's great. But I was interviewing someone else a little while back. And we were discussing women's rights. We were discussing goddess paths and how we don't, traditional monotheistic Christ-based religions, as a woman, you don't see yourself in those faiths, right? So we were talking about, oh, women have come so far. Have we? It's the same old story. People of color, the LGBTQ plus community, how we've come so far, and that's true, but it's nowhere near where we need to go. No. Right? So we keep ourselves safe, we keep ourselves tucked away, where we don't, as witches, we don't always live loud and proud because it's frightening. As women, we don't always live our fullest, we don't always speak up for ourselves because it's scary. It can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. And you address these things in this book, like how to protect yourself in all these ways in this fucking crazy ass world that we're in, because bad shit's still gonna happen.
Right. When we look at, I recently joined TikTok and I'm really interested in seeing where people see themselves and how things are progressing and changing. And it's interesting because so many people see, oh, these super neat names. I want to call myself Crystal Sparkle Dragon. Like, and you be the best Crystal Sparkle Dragon you can be. I'm happy for you. But I don't think enough people understand that it wasn't about being cute. It is about saving your actual life. If someone finds out that Crystal Sparkle Dragon is really Sue Thomas from the bank, guess what? Bad things can happen. So it was a layer of protection created to give us a layer of anonymity between the person's name on the mailbox and the person's name on their witchcraft shop. Because let's face it, owning a witchy shop, that's dangerous. People know not only where you're going to be and when you're going to be there, but that you are other. And I can remember being 17 and my local witchy shop having the windows shot out because they don't like your kind here. Like these are the things that still happen. These are the things that are still an issue.
They still happen. They
my
still
dear
happen.
Adoptive mom wanted to open a witchy store in the next county over. And it's got a little main street. There'd be a lot of foot traffic. She was super excited when she went to the board of this town and said, hey, I want to open a business. And they're like, oh, well, I guess I hope your windows are insured because they're going to get shot out every day until you leave our county. Like, you don't own the county. That's not a thing that happens. But she wound up moving to a county closer to the city because people weren't ridiculous.
And people are ridiculous. And the truth is, like you said, anything that's other is scary to people, which makes no sense to me. Like my brain literally can't compute that because we're all other. We're all different. We're all other. We're all not what is supposed to fit into a certain ideal. Even people who think they fit into a certain ideal don't, right? There are still those people, maybe they're overweight, or maybe they're not perfect, or maybe they don't make the right amount of money, or whatever it is supposed to be that is this perfection doesn't exist. Nope. So why are we ostracized for what we believe in? Why are we ostracized for being witches? It's just, there's so much to unpack, because when you get into something like protection magic, it's not just one thing. It's not just buying new locks for your door or putting salt out or, doing, for me as a kitchen witch, cooking with garlic all the time. That's not the end of the story, because to understand what we are trying to protect from, we have to understand why we need protection, right?
Right.
Okay, let's take a quick break and let's talk to our amazing sponsors, or hear from our amazing sponsors, or about our amazing sponsors. And then we're going to come right back talking more everything with the badass Amy Blackthorn. I think that's what we have to call you from now on, the badass Amy Blackthorn. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back with I think we're calling her badass Amy Blackthorn. And maybe just to stick with the alliteration, we should go the Blackthorn, the badass. Does that work? We're talking with badass Amy Blackthorn, author of so many books, but the one we're talking about today is Protection Magic, Blackthorn's Protection Magic. There's so much, and it's like a tiny book, not tiny, but like it's unassuming because it's a paperback, but there's just so goddamn much information in here. I mean, literally I just randomly opened to page 104. And what am I looking at? The bobby pin. How to use a bobby pin to how to escape handcuffs and how to escape chained hands. Like if somebody throws you in the trunk of their car, she's got you covered. But she also talks a lot about, Amy, you talk a lot about spiritual protection and emotional safety. And that's what we were talking about before the break, is why we need protection magic. Right?
Exactly.
Feeding my own paranoia. Is everyone out to get me? No,
of course not.
Of course not. Of course not. So why do we need to worry about protection magic? What is important about learning to protect ourselves magically with these tools? Why do we need that?
We talked earlier about the reflexive nature that most people feel towards protection magic. Everything is fine and hunky-dory until it's not. So now I have to go there. You see the toy box of the kids, you're looking for the thing, you're throwing everything around the room. I gotta find this one thing, whatever. So Blackthorn's Protection Magic, I wanted it to be that one-stop shop where you could open it and figure out what you needed. Because if you're reacting, action is always faster than reaction. So by establishing proper words or boundaries or practices before they're needed, make them A, much more effective, B, you have a long-standing, we'll say a muscle memory for the work, because it's an ongoing process. We'll say every month or, you know, every lunar cycle, that these things are there to protect us, because without them, the chaos in the bad way is something that's very easy for it to find us. We put doors on our homes to keep out the elements, to protect ourselves from the elements. It's not that we think weather is bad. It's not that we think the weather is out to get us specifically. It's that when we implement these practices before they're needed, they are so much stronger. I give this example to my tarot students all the time. When we're talking about divination work, someone says, okay, here's my reading. What do I do with it? I'm going to tell you that 200 yards ahead, there's a giant pothole that's going to completely wreck your front end. Like, don't hit that pothole. So when you get to the pothole, you can go around that pothole. I would rather be right than accurate. I would rather you avoid that pothole and move on with your life than to come back to me 3 months from now saying, oh, it cost $2,000 to get my front end alignment fixed because I know you told me there was a pothole, but I wasn't sure if I could quite believe you. So I smashed into that pothole going 90 miles an hour and wrecked my car. So I'd rather be right than accurate. So when we talk about it, when we reflect that onto our protection magic, I would rather you not need the protection magic that you have in place in your home, that you have in place around your car or in your office, places where you are more vulnerable, especially in our cars, because we're always going between places. That liminal space is where our cars live. They are a liminal object. They're going between. So making sure those protection magic specific styles are in place means I don't have to worry about spending $2,000 on a front end alignment. We already were aware and ahead of time. So making sure that protection magic is not just flowing, but keeping us cocooned means maybe you don't get hypothermia because your house has walls and a door.
Yes, 100%. And I, again, something that we don't often think about is that car as liminal space, as that car as the transporter of our physical, emotional, spiritual selves from here to work every day, from here to vacation, from wherever it is, those in between spaces. But there is something I want to go back to, and I want to touch on. As the very beginning of this conversation, you said, bad shit's still going to happen. And I think that I'll share with you, and I think we discussed this in our first conversation as well. Years ago, my husband and I suffered a devastating fire. And I'm someone that I work a lot with protection foods, specifically garlic, onions, things like that are meant to ward off negativity, that are meant to keep us safe, things like that. And I remember being outside of our condo and watching it burn to the ground and looking at my partner and saying to him in that moment, I don't understand. I do all this protection magic to keep us safe. How could this happen? And his response was, well, it worked because we are alive and we shouldn't be. So can you talk a little bit about how, even with this, even implementing everything and being proactive and like you said, knowing what's coming ahead, or maybe thinking about the possibilities of things that could go wrong, bad shit's still going to happen. It just may not look the way you expect, or you may still learn from that experience, because we still have to go through trials and we still have to go through shit as human beings. Right. Let's talk about that.
We see ourselves as ourselves. It sounds circular, but it's really not. I can remember laying in my crib and watching dust motes float through the air. We see ourselves in the moment, so we don't see the minute changes that we make over time. So if I were to bump into a friend from high school, they may or may not recognize me. We may or may not catch up. But I don't feel like I've changed from that person. So when we're talking about protection magic, when we're talking about the real things that do happen, we are always attempting to grow and change as people. We're trying to fulfill whatever drive we had before this life, whatever we wanted to learn, experience, being corporeal. And we can't do that sitting at the bus stop waiting for life to come to us, which means that unfortunately, sometimes bad shit's going to happen. However, this is not your soul contract, and no one deserves to tell you that you deserve to be the victim of X, Y, or Z, because you had a lesson to learn. It's trite and it's crap, and we don't do that here.
No.
When we look at the really just shitty things that can and do happen, I think that that's part of the price we pay for having free will and having the agency to make decisions that are sometimes the wrong one. But that agency, I really feel like, is the reason for literally everything existing on the planet.
Right. Because bad shit is going to happen. Sometimes you have no control over, like my house burnt down. I had no control over that happening, but I had control over how I responded to that event. Right.
And it makes a big difference.
Right. What we said in the beginning about being victimized versus having a victim mentality. All of us at some point in our lives will have bad things happen, have had bad things happen. Those are not our fault. You didn't ask for that cosmically so you could grow as a person. That's not how it works. You may choose to grow as a person from whatever you've been through when you decide to heal, when you decide to, work through those traumas, but you didn't ask for it and it's not your fault. I want to be really, really clear about that. We're talking about some heavy fucking topics, right? Yes. You didn't, it's never your fault when bad shit happens to you. Sometimes we make bad decisions that put us in a situation where we could potentially be harmed, but the person or the thing happening to you, the thing that is victimizing you, you did not ask for that. You just didn't, that's just not how it works. Right. So God, there's so much here, Amy. How do you, right? You can't prevent those things.
Right. We can be aware. We can be situationally aware. We can be magically aware. In the first section, there's a spot where I talk about Cooper's color code, dealing with situational awareness. You can be that engaged person who meets people's eyes, who, is very aware of their surroundings, and that may help you. It may help you feel more in control of the situation. It may help you with actually being able to respond to threats. But our sense of self and our projection of ourselves, that being involved with who we are on such a spiritual level doesn't mean that we will be able to see and head off every issue. But the number of times that it will do its job without you even noticing are infinitesimal. There's so many ways and means that you are preventing these things from happening just by being aware of your surroundings, just by being the person leaving the mall with their head on a swivel and engaging with the people around them. They're not, just by not looking like the right quote victim can save you some harder issues down the line. So even if I got mugged tomorrow, knock wood, how many times have I prevented that from happening just by being aware of my surroundings, and just like I look like a person who knows what they're doing and where they're going and is self-possessed enough to cause an issue if somebody steps up to you. Like, how many times I actually had that happen where I could definitively prove that my situational awareness got me out of trouble, kept me out of trouble. I worked at a major retailer of handmade bath and body products in a mall.
We will not discuss the name of such a place.
Right. They didn't pay for sponsorship. So I was leaving the mall at 10 o'clock at night. So I stopped at the grocery store, grabbed whatever I was going to make for dinner, this was a regular occurrence. So it's 10 o'clock. They close at 11. There's nobody there. So I park right in the spot closest to the door. I'm under a street light. You do all the things that you're supposed to do. I grab whatever I'm doing. I come out of the grocery store. I always carry all of my groceries in one hand if I'm not using a cart, because you have a second hand free to do as it needs to do, whether it's defend yourself or show someone how you feel about the situation. I always have my second hand free. My dominant hand is leading the party. So I'm leaving the store. I'm heading back to my vehicle, and I look at where I'm going, and there's a man standing at the bumper to the rear of my vehicle. One of the things about practicing our situational awareness and our readiness or vigilance, so to speak, is you get a lot of information in a very short period of time. There's a pile, like 6 or 7 cigarette butts at his feet. So he's been standing there for a good minute. There's a possibility that he watched me walk into the Acme and is now standing here waiting for me to come back out. I pull in all this information, and I'm walking to my car. Now, could I have walked the other way and just waited for him to leave? Absolutely. But we're not shoulding ourselves all over the place. Should is a false god. Karen Marie Monig, thank you very much. What instead I'm doing is I'm making sure that I'm proceeding with purpose. And the gentleman who is standing at the bumper of my car starts to walk towards me. He's going to meet me halfway. He has nothing on his wrist, but he looks at his arm and says, what he's doing is he's opening salvo. He's going to ask me what time it is. There's no watch there. Can you tell me what time it is? What this does is it gets people to engage with you, and it's open in the circles where this is a prominent technique. It's called bitching up. Like if you speak back, if you answer my question, then you're a bitch. Like let's go with the thing. So now he's going to ask me what time it is, because this gives him permission to get closer to me and hopefully engage with me as a person. So I can, it's 10 o'clock. Nobody, like, I'm not going to look at my arm. I'm not going to disengage with you. You can stay or you can go. Like, these are your options.
Do you maintain eye contact at that moment and just say,
yes,
don't have a watch?
Absolutely. So he sees my self-possessed nature. I'm not flinching. I'm not backing down. I'm not doing any of the things that he probably expects. So he gets within probably 6 feet and decides, this is not the one. I'm gonna go over here. I did leave the gas on. He books off to the side. This is not the right thing. I'm a little weirded out.
Sure.
I get in my car. I go home. I'm a little up in my chest here.
Yeah.
Do I have self-defense tools on me? Yes. Do I want to need them? No. I get home. I tell my partner, like, this is the thing that happened. I can now have my hysterics.
Right.
Everything's safe. I made it home fine. So I had school the next day. I didn't go. I go back to the Acme 2 days later, a day and a half later, because I'm there and I've been shopping at the same grocery store for 17 years. Everybody knows me. So Beth at the deli says, oh God, Amy, you'll never guess what happened last night. Okay, tell me. She says a lady was leaving here late at night, like, between 10 and 11. And she left, and a guy walked up to her in the parking lot and asked her what time it was. And she told him what time it was. And then he punched her in the face and stole her wallet, and then just kept hitting her until she was unconscious. Like, what exactly is happening in this world? I said, Beth, I absolutely believe you, because the beginning part of that happened to me 2 nights ago. Like, I knew that this was a real thing that could happen and did happen.
Right.
Luckily, it was caught on camera. They were able to catch the person who did this. They had, it's a grocery store. They have cameras for shoplifting.
Yeah.
But they were able to figure out who it was and see what happened. And that is the part that is really scary for a lot of people, is the fact that she gave him her wallet and he still decided to assault her and put her in the hospital. Just because you do what the other person wants you to do does not make you safe. Does not mean that everything's cool. Doesn't mean you're going to be okay.
Right.
So just automatically rolling over and showing somebody your belly, like, that's not necessarily going to do you any good.
No, that self-possession that you mentioned is so important. Again, I think that's something specifically for women. we're always told to do these things and do those
Mhm.
things, right? Okay, when you're walking through it, first of all, don't ever walk through a dark parking lot by yourself. And if you have to, you hold your keys a certain way, and you always are looking around and make sure somebody knows where you are. And, don't put your drink down at a party. All of these things women
Mhm.
specifically are told. My partner is never told, don't put your drink down at a party. He could easily be roofied too, but that's not what boys are grown up to know.
Mhm.
And even those things that they don't necessarily, like you said, prevent you from being victimized. But I think something you said that you keep going back to is that self-awareness, that self-possession, and that situational awareness, right? Short example, because I know we're running out of time, but I'm from New York originally. I grew up
Mhm.
out on Long Island, but we went to the city all the time. And now when I bring people to the city, I brought my assistant for the first time to New York City, and I was like, listen, you don't look up, don't look down. You look straight ahead. You look straight ahead at all times. If there's something you want to see, tap me on the shoulder and we'll stop, right? You don't look like a tourist. You have to be self-possessed. You have to know what's going on around you at all times. So you can't look like a victim. You can't energetically put out that you are a tourist, that you don't belong here. And people more than often than not will avoid you, like this gentleman did. Let's not call him a gentleman, like this prick did in that parking lot. He realized this is not someone I can take down easily. It's, for lack of a better analogy, and I know this is probably really awful to say, but it's, the weak one of the herd is going to be the one that the predators pick out, right? The
And I have the
predator
Mhm.
is looking for the weak ones. I mean, is that a horrible thing to say?
I think it can be hard for some people to hear, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's any less true.
Mm.
I have the privilege of being 6 feet tall, and I pretty much was 6 feet tall by the time I was in the 8th grade. Like I shot up like a weed, so I don't look frail or small or easily stealable.
Right. Somebody, like, I am a chubby girl. Someone would have to really work hard to get me in the back of their van. They could lure me in with tacos and kittens. That is how I will get kidnapped. If you bring a taco truck and you're giving away free kittens, absolutely, I will get in your truck on my own. But you have a hard time lifting this bitch. I'm just saying.
Goats and pajamas.
Right. But you're right. It's a hard thing to say, and we cannot. Your physical appearance is only part of it.
Right.
It's how you walk into the room.
Presentation is everything.
Right. So if you could, what do you hope people take away from this book? And again, it's so aptly timed because so many of us have a lot of fear and anxiety around our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being right now. What do you want people to take away from this book?
It's never the victim's fault. Not ever. And no matter how many really amazing tips, tricks, hints, what have you that exist in this book, it's a finite item. So one of the reviews that I read wishes there was more talk about cyber protection. And the only problem with that is by the time it made it to print, it'd be obsolete already.
Mm.
So continue to grow in your practice in that awareness, but give yourself some slack, because our society, whenever something bad happens, our friends and our family who love us very dearly will say, well, couldn't you have done this, or shouldn't you have done that? And it's as bad as it hurts and as weird as it feels, it's not about you. Our prosperity doctrine that's left over from mid-century Christianity tells us that there should have been something. Bad things only happen to bad people. Like if you're a good person, nothing bad will ever happen to you. So our friends and our family say, well, couldn't you have done this, or should you have done that? And it just because it doesn't necessarily have to do with the event that happened they're trying to figure out a way so that that didn't happen to them. They need the world to be a place where they are still safe. And that invalidates the feelings of the victim of the actual crime more often than it doesn't.
Right.
So being able to tell them that no matter how insensitive your family or your friends are being, they don't recognize it. It's not, they're just trying to be safe. They're trying to figure out the magic formula to keep them safe in this world. And there isn't one. And the day that we learn that is going to be the hardest day of your life. The day that you realize that sometimes bad shit's going to happen. And that, as sad as it is, I feel like that's the day that we grow into our adulthood, is the day that we realize that no matter how safe we want to be, that we project ourselves to be, how safe that we work to keep ourselves that way, that's the day that we lose that childlike innocence.
And you should always, I get a great analogy for this, I think, is you should always wear your seatbelt.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you're not going to get into an accident, but you should always wear your seatbelt. And Blackthorn's protection magic is like your seatbelt in life and in emotional, spiritual, magical, physical practices. This is your seatbelt. Always have it on, because when the bad shit happens, the impact of it may be lessened because of what you've learned and how you have prepared yourself, right?
Right.
You may still get into an accident because you can't control the other drivers out there.
Yes.
But you can do your best to have a car with working airbags and put your seatbelt on.
Yeah. Don't feel like you can, you see the truck coming. And hold on 1 second while I put my seatbelt on.
No,
it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. It's got to be automatic. The minute you get in that car, the minute you wake up in the morning, you're putting this protection on you so that, I don't want to say if, when, bad shit's always going to happen. It could be tomorrow. It could be 10 years from now. When something happens in your life, in your work, in your relationship, in your health, in your physical, someone physically victimizing you, any of these things could happen to you. You will be more prepared to defend yourself and more prepared to do the healing from whatever it is that happens.
By reading the book, what we're doing is we're giving you permission to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the list of things in your head that you can do to keep these things from happening, when there's an issue, that Rolodex is going to come up blank, because we don't train, we don't fall to our highest level of training.
Mm-hmm.
We fall to the bare minimum level of training that our brains can come up with, because you're flooded with adrenaline, your major muscle groups are all tensing for fight, flight, freeze, fawn. All of those things are happening at the same time. So if you haven't practiced something, if you don't read what's available to you, those things are going to happen. And one of those conditions is condition black, that where you freeze and you say, I had something for this. What was it? There's an amusing quote that I actually wound up taking out of the book because it wasn't helpful. But one of my black belt instructors quoted Mike Tyson, like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Like, the first time that happens, you stand there like a jerk going,
and you're like,
well, I didn't see that coming.
what just happened? I don't know what just happened. But these are great principles to take out into the world. It's not just about how do I get out of handcuffs? Mm-hmm. It's how do I prepare myself for what could possibly happen? And when I am prepared, I feel safe, because I know I've done everything that I can do and everything else is out of my control. So if some shit falls in my lap, I'm going to be able to, like you said, my default is not, it's, I think I'm prepared for this, or I know how to get out of it. And I just think it's really important, the work that you're doing. I think there hasn't been a book like this ever. I think it's really important that everyone pick up a copy of Blackthorn's Protection Magic. At the time of recording this, like we said, this book has just come out here in April. And by the time this episode airs, hopefully everyone will have it. And if they don't have it, they should go buy it. They should read it. Do you have this on audiobook yet?
Yes. It came out the same day.
Get it on audiobook. If you're like me and you are driving in your liminal spaces, going from place to place in your car, listen to it, learn it. The tools in here, quite frankly, could save your fucking life, and the lives of the people around you, the people you care about. Protecting ourselves eventually spills over into protecting our loved ones and our households and all of that stuff. So get this book, read this book. It is your seatbelt. Blackthorn's Protection Magic. Amy Blackthorn, the amazing, the badass Blackthorn. You're just I know this was like really much heavier than our first conversation, but it feels good to talk about these things that aren't normally discussed.
Yes.
So I love that. And I'm so grateful that you were here and we got to spend this time together. Okay, Amy.
Yes.
Last question, which I don't know if has it changed since the last time? Have you thought about it? The question I ask everyone as a kitchen witch, if I were to create for you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
Oh my goodness. I have this really fantastic chicken that I enjoy making, but it's sort of involved. But it's a mimosa jam covered chicken for the sweetness and the light. And all of that beautiful citrus is fabulous for protection magic.
It sure is. That's so all sunshine and sun god and purification. And, ooh. Did you put that over like a rice pilaf?
Yes.
My mouth literally just started watering.
Yes.
I have a bowl of fresh citrus on my, I'm literally looking at it right now. And now I'm like, my mouth is watering. Oh, mimosa jam. So you like cook it with so I do an apricot chicken.
Ooh.
Right. So I take the apricot jam and I mix it with orange juice, and sometimes I throw in some onions and whatever, and I mix it all together and I melt it down into a sauce. And then I toss it over the chicken and I bake the chicken right in that. And then I put it over like a wild rice, apricot, and sultana. Sultanas are
yes. Oh my God, yes.
You love sultanas. They're raisins, but they're white raisins instead of like our traditional, red grape raisins. And you put that over the top and oh, now I'm starving. It sounds amazing. Amy Blackthorn. Amy Blackthorn. Thank you so much for being here. You really are. Okay. I don't like say this, but you like, seriously, this work that you're doing is a gift to the community. It's really necessary. It's really important. People have been through a shit ton of stuff in their lives. There's so much happening in the world now and in the last few years. What you're doing and what you're talking about is important. Keep the conversation going. Keep it going. We need you. And we need this. We need this. So thank you. Check out Amy Blackthorn online. Amy, where can we find you?
AmyBlackthorn.com has the first 2 chapters of each of my books. You can download them for free and know that there's something you need and want when you go to purchase it. I know finances are tight all over, especially with inflation. So read the first 2 chapters, know that it speaks to your soul. You need this in your life. You can check out, you can get autographed copies of any of my books, as well as my magical teas. There's oils and candles, or all sorts of fun projects at Blackthornsbotanicals.com. Don't forget the S in the middle.
Blackthornsbotanicals.com, and on Instagram and now on TikTok.
Yep, at Amy Blackthorn Author. You can check out the fun things I'm doing. The herbal dating game is always, I think, is a lot of fun. So get to know some plants, get to know some materials in your heart piece, so you can develop those relationships within yourself.
Thank you so much for being here. You are fabulous as always. And hopefully we'll have you back on for a 3rd time when your new book comes out around Samhain. Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be fabulous.
That would be fabulous. Amy Blackthorn, thank you so much for being here. And until next time, I wish you many blessings and so much gratitude.